So last time we looked at this sort of second phase of the day of the Lord, the restoration. First there was the destruction by the invasion of the locust army, and then the God restored Israel, or will restore Israel. And we talked about this, that this restoration, there's two ways to look at it. That it's either something that He's already done in the past, at least partially, or something that remains for the future. And the thing is, those two viewpoints aren't mutually exclusive. It could be a little bit of both. And then he said, we looked at this statement that he said, "I'll pour out my Spirit upon all people." And once again, that's not necessarily a future event or a single event at all, but an ongoing process. We saw that He's been pouring out His Spirit on people for specific purposes pretty much throughout the Bible. And so, it's not necessarily an end times event when this is all going to happen. Now, nevertheless, part of the restoration that he's talking about, and specifically in verses 1 and 2 of chapter 3, "For behold, in those days and at that time when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat." That hasn't happened yet. That's clearly an end times, a final day judgment, I think, my opinion, that, is the same one that John foretold in Revelation 21, and the subsequent restoration that he talked about in Revelation. Sorry, it was the restoration is in Revelation 21 and 22. The judgment is in Revelation 20. And then we looked at this idea, this statement that he said, "I'll restore to you the years that the chewing locust has eaten." And we saw that can be taken as restoring us, any of us that comes to repentance, to repair the damage that sin has done. It's a sad thing that you were talking about with these young people that have done so much damage that it would take an abject miracle for Him to restore their bodies to the point where they're survivable. Just a crying shame. And then before we move on, I had a little correction here. I don't think this correction is in your hard copy that I gave you last week, because I found it while I was looking into Genesis this week. But I said last week that every reference to the Philistines was as an enemy of Israel. Mm-hmm. But Abraham made a covenant with the Philistines, with Abimelech, the head of the Philistines, and Isaac dwelt in peace with the Philistines. So they weren't always the enemies of you can read about those in Genesis 21 and 26.
I was just thinking of David, but they were still enemies of the Israelites. David went to live with them for a while. But
yeah, he pretended to be crazy.
Yeah, they were still enemies of the Israelites.
Yep. And really, the reason David did that is because he was running from Absalom.
Saul? I thought it was Saul.
I thought he was running from Absalom, his son. Was it Saul? Okay. Anyway, so, and also from that, we know from the fact that the Philistines are already in Genesis 21 with Abraham, we know that they were there in Canaan long before Joshua and the Israelites arrived back from Egypt, and in fact, long before there were any such thing as Israelites. So anyway, so that's just a little correction to what I said last week. Now this last portion, the last half of Joel 3, is a poem, and it's largely symbolic. And the thing that's cool about it is it's strikingly similar to the symbolism that we find in other places. So most of tonight we're going to be comparing, what Joel says with what's said in those other places. So, beginning in verse 9 and going through verse 13, we find a series of commands or imperative sentences. And the first few are directed to the nations. So, God told Joel to tell the nations these commands from God. And so, let's start in verse 9. It says, "Proclaim this among the nations. Consecrate," and that word is kadas. I'll look at that in a minute because it's an interesting word. Consecrate for war. Stir up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, "I am a warrior." Now, this Hebrew word kadas, it's translated in the ESV as consecrate. And it can mean prepare or dedicate yourself to something. Most of the other English translations translate this word as prepare. But that doesn't really quite capture the sense of the word. And it's interesting that this is a Bible that I had never heard of before.
I've never heard of that either. Legacy Standard Bible?
The Legacy Standard Bible.
Okay.
It says, "Set yourself apart for war." And that idea comes a little bit closer to the mark. This preparation for war is more than just gathering up weapons and, training in combat skills and things like that. It's devotion to this idea of war, to the mission. And of course, the mission would be invading Israel in this army of locusts, right?
Doesn't consecrate basically mean the same thing as set?
That's why the ESV translates it that way, but it's a strange word because normally when we think of consecration, it's something holy, right? Anyway, so I made a kind of smart aleck statement here. God is essentially telling the nations here, bring it on. Give it your best shot. His little Joan Jett imitation, wasn't it Joan Jett? No, it was I forget who it was. Hit me with your best shot. Now, this reference to plowshares and swords and pruning hooks is exactly the converse of what Isaiah said about them. In Isaiah 1, starting in verse 2, "It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of mountains, and shall be lifted up above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. And many people shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and shall decide disputes for many peoples. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more." Won't that be a wonderful day?
So I guess they're taking those plows that they made into swords and they're
Beating them back in
and turning around and making them back in.
Yep. And by the way, Isaiah 1:4, "He shall judge between the nations," etc., is identical to Micah 4:3, word for word. So Micah had apparently read Isaiah. So then continuing on in verse 11, "Hasten and come, all you surrounding nations, and gather yourselves there. Bring down your warriors, O Lord. Let the nations stir themselves up and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat. For there I will sit to judge all the surrounding nations." And so this is reiterating his prophecy of the of the final judgment. Remember that when we first looked at beginning in verse 3, I think, or verse 2 of chapter 3, at this valley of Jehoshaphat, I said it doesn't really seem to fit all that well what Joel says about it with what John said about the great white throne judgment for a few reasons. That, he was talking about judging specific people for specific crimes against Israel, whereas the Great White Throne judgment talks about judgment of all people for all sins, including Israel. Right? So, anyway, he says here, though, that he'll bring an end to the war, right, forever. So, anyway, whether this is a judgment that's already happened or will soon happen, or whether it's an end times judgment, I'll leave that for you all to decide. And remember that this is the second reference to the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the second of only 2 references in the entire Bible, both of them here in Joel. So then in verse 13 it says, "Put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Go in, tread, for the winepress is full, the vats overflow, for their evil is great." Now these previous commands, these imperative statements, were for the nations, right? Commands of God given through Joel to the nations. But this one is a command from God to God. From God the Father to God the Son and to an angel. And where do I get that? If you look in Revelation 14, in verse 14, it says, "Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud one like a son of man, with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, 'Put in your sickle and reap, for the hour of reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe.' So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, and the angel who has authority came out from the altar, the angel who has authority over the fire. And he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, 'Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe.'" This is where John Steinbeck got the title for his book, The Grapes of Wrath. "For its grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia, and that's about 184 miles. So that's a whole lot of blood. So continuing in verse 14, "Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon are darkened, and the stars withdraw their shining." Maybe this valley of decision is the same as the valley of Jehoshaphat. Seems like it. It's the place where God's going to judge all the nations. This part of the prophecy is strikingly similar to what Isaiah said about the day of the Lord in Isaiah 9, verses 9 through 11. That's a misquote. I don't know what chapter this is. I'm going to have to go look. I'll correct the notes. But anyway, this quote, wherever it is in Isaiah, says, "Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land a desolation, and to destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of the heaven and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be dark in its rising, and the moon will not shed its light. I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the pomp of the arrogant, and lay low the pompous pride of the ruthless." Now, Jesus said something very similar. Matthew 24 is the... I'm sorry?
That wasn't it on,
I think we're both missing page 4.
Are
I
you?
got a page 4,
Where you going?
but it,
Well, I rearranged this because this picture was in a strange place. So I'll have to go look.
wait, I got it.
Anyway, I think I posted it once I'd done the rearrangement. Anyway, Matthew 24 is called the Olivet Discourse because he was on the Mount of Olives with his disciples, and they asked him, what will be the signs of the end of the age and the signs of your coming? And he gave them all these things to look out for: earthquakes and wars and rumors of wars, and he talks about how bad it's going to be. So, God have mercy on you if you're pregnant, right? Or if it happens in the wintertime, because it's going to be bad. And he essentially said, because God loves you, this won't last too long, but it's going to be bad. And then in verse 29, after he talked about all that in Matthew 24, he said, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in the heavens the sign of the Son of Man. Then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So clearly, this is a future fulfillment, right? So at least part of Joel is left for the future.
I always think it's interesting that, Jesus said all that about earthquakes and all that. People look for those signs as being the signs of the end. And Jesus said,
but the end is not
end
yet.
Is not yet. So those are not the signs of the end. Those are just things that are going to happen all throughout history.
Yep. So I know this little diagram is kind of hard to read. Jerusalem is shaped like the Jewish or the Hebrew letter Shin. It looks like a W, right? There's a hill on the east called the Mount of Olives, and there's a hill in the middle, which is really two hills, and then there's the hill on the west, which I think is Mount Scopus. That's where the Knesset is and the Holocaust Museum. But in between, there are in the legs of this W, there are two valleys. One of them is the Valley of Gehenna, which is on the west of the old city, and that's where they had the old garbage dump. And it's sometimes Gehenna is compared to hell. And then the one on the east, the valley on the east, is the valley of the Kidron Brook. That's the valley that Jesus and his disciples walked through on the night that he was betrayed. And he walked through it many times because Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived in Bethany, which is just a little bit further east on the other side of the Mount of Olives. And he would stay with them when he was in Jerusalem. He would stay with them and then go into the city and then come back and stay at night. Anyway, this diagram, like I said, is kind of hard to read, but I couldn't find another one quite like it. So the valley, I'm sorry?
Where it has the Central Valley, is that the Kidron Valley?
The Kidron Valley is on the right, and it says Valley of the Kid,
What was the other one?
Valley of Gehenna.
Gehenna, yeah. Okay. Yeah, this says Kidron.
But actually, I'm wrong. The Central Valley is the one between the Mount Moriah and Mount Zion and Mount Scopus.
So
The Valley of Gehenna is on the other side of that. Right. Right. So the yellow there, it's called the City of David. It's Mount Zion. And that's the one that David and his army took from the Jebusites when they crawled up the water shaft. Jerusalem's original name was Jebus or Jebus. And then the green part there is Mount Moriah. And that's where the temple was built. And that's where the Temple Mount is today. Did you know that the Temple Mount is artificial? It's hollow inside. It's made out of huge stone vaults. It's the largest man-made platform in the world.
34 acres.
But Herod expanded that from what Solomon built. David built this little bridge between the two, this little earthwork bridge between the two mountains called the Millo. And then Solomon built the temple on Mount Moriah. So, with all that having said, looking at verse 16 in Joel, the Lord roars from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth quake. But the Lord is a refuge to his people, a stronghold to the people of Israel. So you shall know that I am the Lord your God. There it is again now. Who dwells in Zion, my holy mountain, and Jerusalem shall be holy, and strangers shall never again pass through it. Now, Jerusalem has been intimately connected with God and with the Israelite people since the time of Abraham. When Abraham went and rescued Lot from Chedorlaomer and the kings that were united with him, he brought him back, and he ran into this guy Melchizedek, who was the king of Salem, or Jerusalem, and the priest of the Most High God. There's only two places where people are called kings and priests in the Bible. All right? We will be kings and priests in the future. That's in Revelation 1, I think, or Revelation 5. Anyway, but so far there's only this guy Melchizedek and
Lord
Jesus, right? A king and our high priest, as Hebrews calls him, our great high priest. Anyway, Abraham ran into this guy Melchizedek, and he offered him a tithe. I think Abraham gave him a tithe. You can find that in Genesis 14. I believe, and I think Hebrews makes it pretty clear if you look at Hebrews 6, that 6 and 7, that Melchizedek was a pre-incarnate vision of Jesus. But I'll leave you to look at that and decide that for yourselves. Mount Moriah, where the Temple Mount was built, is where God called Abraham to sacrifice Isaac.
You know, I've never associated that as being near Jerusalem. You know, I mean, it just,
Mm-hmm.
I should have, but it's just something that never clicked together in my mind.
Mount Moriah is also where David bought the threshing floor of Araunah.
You know, in order to build the temple.
If you go to Mount Moriah today, there are two places where the bedrock sticks out from the platform. A threshing floor has to be smooth rock and it has to be flat. What they would do is they'd take the grain in, and it has to be high so the wind can blow the chaff away. There are two places on Mount Moriah where that's true. One of them is underneath the Dome of the Rock, which most people believe is where the Holy of Holies was. And then there's another place called the Dome of the Spirits, which is just a little gazebo thing, and it's maybe the whole flat spot is as big as that rug, probably. That's about 150 feet or so north of the Dome of the Rock. So one of those two places is where this threshing floor of Araunah was, and where the Holy of Holies was.
It was the Dome of the Spirits himself.
Well, we can be hopeful of that. Anyway, you can read about the sacrifice, or the called for but not carried out sacrifice of Isaac in Genesis 22. And of course, we'll get to that when we talk about Genesis. Anyway, we already talked about David conquering Jerusalem by having his men climb up the water shaft. That's in 2 Samuel 5. And then God gave a promise to David through the prophet Nathan. Nathan came and talked to David quite a bit, and sometimes he brought good news and sometimes he brought bad news. Remember, there was no temple at the time. They were still worshiping in the tabernacle. So in 2 Samuel 7, Nathan had come to David with what God had told him to tell him. And it says in verse 12, when your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring, and of course that offspring was Solomon, after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish his throne of his kingdom forever. Now, I didn't get into it, but God says that he will put his name on Jerusalem. So this is Jerusalem is where God says he will dwell on earth. So, it's kind of no small wonder that Jerusalem is a cup of trembling, right? Anyway.
That passage there could also be the prophecy of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well,
because he's the offspring of David, and he built a house for his name, which is the church.
Yes, he fulfilled this promise
Yeah.
by the birth and death and resurrection and soon return of Jesus. To have one of David's line through Judah, or from Judah through David to Jesus, this was fulfilled. This promise to David was fulfilled by the coming of Jesus. But, of course, we know that Solomon had all those wives and porcupines, and he fell into idolatry with them, right? So God took the kingdom away from Solomon. Well, not from Solomon, but from his offspring. God said that I'm not going to... God warned Solomon that this was going to happen. But he said, I'm not going to take it from you for the sake of your father. Right? But I will take it from your offspring. And so then this guy, what is his name? Ahijah the Shilonite was a prophet, and he was sent to Jeroboam, who was son of Nebat, who was Solomon's servant. And he said, no, I'm going to take the kingdom from him, from his offspring, and I'm going to give it to you. But I'm going to leave him one tribe. Guess what tribe? Judah. And so therefore, this was fulfilled. This, if he had taken Judah as well, then this promise to David couldn't have been fulfilled through the offspring that came from his body, right? And so therefore, he gave Rehoboam, Solomon's son, Judah, and later on it turned out he was also ruling over Benjamin. Famous Benjamite. Who's the most famous Benjamite we know? Saul, then Paul, right? Saul of Tarsus, right?
Saul and Saul.
Yes.
Saul.
So.
And Paul Saul.
Yep.
Paul Saul.
So when this guy Ahijah was talking to Jeroboam, he said, "Yet to his son Rehoboam I will give one tribe, Judah, that David my servant may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where I've chosen to put my name." So Jerusalem has been a bone of contention among people since ancient times, and particularly Mount Moriah, where the Temple Mount was, and it continues to this day. Did you know that the ultra-Orthodox have said that Jews should not go up on the Temple Mount?
Because they're not clean.
They can't be cleansed with the ashes of the red heifer because there's no place to sacrifice the red heifer.
Well, there's no place to make any sacrifices.
Yeah, so they say that the ultra-Orthodox believe that the current state of Israel is not real Israel. They believe it's a counterfeit. Anyway, many
You're right.
many Jews do go up on the mount on the Temple Mount. It was funny. We went up there the first time we went to Israel, and then the second time, there's this Muslim council that's basically run. It's a proxy of the government of Jordan. It runs access to the Temple Mount. You have to, that area, that whole area is there are more security cameras there than you can, sneeze at. It's a very, very well locked down place. Anyway, when we went up there, for some reason, they allowed Scott to bring the video camera. He was our media guy in our church, but they wouldn't let him bring a microphone. Because they didn't want Steve, our pastor, preaching or praying up there and having it recorded. Right? Didn't mind silent movies, but they didn't want the microphone up there.
I didn't mind the kids playing ball with the soccer up there.
Yeah.
Bouncing their ball off of the
Dome of the Rock.
Dome of the Rock.
Yeah.
That was okay.
Yep.
Just can't pray.
But the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Do you guys know the story about the Al-Aqsa Mosque? Why it's considered the third most sacred site in Islam? The Dome of the Rock is not, by the way. It's not a mosque at all. It's a shrine. But the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is where Solomon's porch once was, and I don't know whether it's in the Quran or whether it's in some other writing, Islamic writing, but supposedly Muhammad, in a vision, went on this magical horse, whose name, by the way, was Barak, the horse's name.
The horse is part of the horse.
Modern times, we only have part of the horse named Barak. But anyway, this horse flew him to the what does it say? The furthest mosque. Well, that was declared to be Jerusalem. All right. And so the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built in the Middle Ages by the Turks. And it's after Mecca and Medina. It's the next most sacred place in Islam. Anyway, there's a lot of, there's trouble over the Al-Aqsa Mosque every week, So Zechariah foretold that God would make Jerusalem a source of contention that it is today. And this is long, and I apologize, but I couldn't find a place to divide this. Zechariah 12, starting in verse 2. Behold, I'm about to make Jerusalem a cup of staggering to all the surrounding peoples. The siege of Jerusalem will also be against Judah. On that day I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will surely hurt themselves. And all the nations of the earth will gather against it. On that day, declares the Lord, I will strike every horse with panic and its rider with madness. But for the sake of the house of Judah, I will keep my eyes open when I strike every horse of the peoples with blindness. Then the clans of Judah shall say to themselves, the inhabitants of Jerusalem have strength through the Lord of hosts, their God. On that day, I will make the clans of Judah like a blazing pot in the midst of wood, like a flaming torch among sheaves, and they shall devour to the right and to the left all the surrounding peoples, while Jerusalem shall again be inhabited in its place in Jerusalem. And the Lord will give salvation to the tents of Judah first, that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem may not surpass that of Judah. On that day, and this is what you were talking about, Randy, he brought salvation through Judah, right? And when we get to Genesis, the very end of Genesis, you'll find out that Jacob, or Israel, prophesied this when he blessed Judah. He said the scepter would not depart from him. Anyway, on that day, let's see. And the Lord will give salvation to the tents of Judah first, and the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem may not surpass that of Judah. And on that day, the Lord will protect the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the feeblest among them on that day shall be like David, and the house of David shall be like God, like the angel of the Lord going before them. And on that day I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. And will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy, so that when they look on me, on whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him as one who mourns for an only child, and weep bitterly over him as one weeps over a firstborn. So I wanted to talk about Jerusalem, but when we talk about Jerusalem, turns out we start talking about Judah and Jesus coming in the line of Judah. And so, therefore, God will fulfill this promise that he made to David through Nathan. And, you know, it's the right time of the year to read this prophecy from Isaiah 9. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, and the throne of David, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it, to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. So, yes, the promise that Nathan brought to David was a promise of this fulfillment through the coming of Jesus. So, continuing on in verse 18 in Joel 3, and in that day the mountains shall drip sweet wine, and the hills shall flow with milk, and all the stream beds of Judah shall flow with water, and a fountain shall come forth from the house of the Lord, and water the valley of Shittim. Now, your translation may say acacia grove here in the place of Shittim. The word Shittim means acacia. You know, it means an acacia tree. It's a fertile area that's northeast of Jericho, on the other side of the Jordan, on the east side of the Jordan, and it's watered, it's irrigated by the Jordan, and it has been for ever. A lot of date palm trees there, and the Jordanians now are growing citrus fruit there, and believe it or not, bananas, just like the Israelites are, or the Israelis, I should say, all up and down the Jordan River, because it's a source of water, right? Just as an aside here, I was waiting for an airplane in Baghdad one night that was late, and there was this guy there who was a retired sergeant major, I think, and he had gone back to school and got his master's degree in hydrology. And we were talking for a while. He was an advisor on water to, what's his name? The guy that got fired. The general that was in charge.
Oh, yeah. The one-eyed guy?
No, this was an American general.
Oh, okay.
That was Moshe Dayan.
Okay.
But anyway, this guy that I was talking to in the airport said, you know, everybody talks about the oil, but this river is the resource, right? The Euphrates. It waters the entire region. And it's the same with the Jordan. The Jordan is the reason Israel is able to, prosper. That's why they have olives and grapes and dates and citrus fruit. But just south of there, it flows into the Dead Sea and becomes useless. Right? Salt water. It's the highest concentration of salt in water in the world.
It's not useless.
Well, it's not useless, but it's useless for agriculture. But this valley of Shittim is just north of where it turns to salt. So they use the Jordan to irrigate it. But these prophecies say, just as an aside here, there's some recent archaeology that has discovered some stuff in this. You guys know what a tell is? It's a hill that's shaped like a tetrahedron, not a, where are those? A trapezoid. And the reason that they're shaped like that is because you always build the new city on top of the old city, right? But you can't build it all the way out to the edge or else it'll fall over. So they have, throughout the ancient world or throughout the Middle East, they have these trapezoid-shaped hills, and they can tell from miles away that's an ancient city. That's a place where we need to dig. Yep. Well, there's one of these tells that's there in the valley of Shittim that they've dug up some stuff, pottery in particular, that shows that it was subjected to a fire over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's probably where Sodom and Gomorrah were. Anyway, or at least possibly. Like I said, today it's very fertile. It's relatively fertile, surrounded by an arid desert that makes the American Southwest look like the Garden of Eden. I'm telling you, I've been there. This place is desolate. So when God says he's going to make it desolate, he's not going to have a lot of work to do. But anyway, it says here that there's going to be this stream that's flowing from the house of the Lord to water this valley. And there are a few other places where it talks about that. It proclaims here that this whole region will be made fertile by this stream. Once again, Zechariah in chapter 14, verse 4, has a very similar parallel passage. It says, "On that day, his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mount shall move northward, and the other half southward. And you shall flee to the valley of my mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach to Azal. And you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. On that day there shall be no light, cold, or frost, and there shall be a unique day, which is known to the Lord, neither day nor night, but at evening time there shall be light. On that day living waters shall flow out from Jerusalem, half of them to the eastern sea, and half of them to the western sea." So that's the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean. "It shall continue in summer as in winter." Now today, in Israel, they have this early rain and latter rain, and that's when it rains. There's a few weeks in the fall, late fall, and a few weeks in the early spring. And the rest of the time, they've got to live on water that they've gathered. Every rooftop in Israel is a catchment for water. They're very, very, I hate to use the word, but they're religious about water, and they have to be. But anyway, it says, "On that day, living water shall flow out from Jerusalem, half of them to the eastern sea and half from the western sea, and it shall continue summer as in summer as in winter." So it'll be year round. "And the Lord will be king over all the earth on that day. The Lord will be one, and his name one." And then Ezekiel also talks about something very similar in Ezekiel, and this is another really long one. I'm sorry, I apologize. Ezekiel 37, verses 1 through 12. It says, "Then he brought me back to the door of the temple, and behold, water was issuing from below the threshold of the temple toward the east, for the temple faced east. The water was flowing down from below the south end of the threshold of the temple, south of the altar. Then he brought me out by way of the north gate and led me around on the outside of the outer gate that faces toward the east. And behold, the water was trickling out on the south side. Going on eastward with a measuring line in his hand, the man measured 1,000 cubits, and then led me through the water, and it was ankle deep. Again he measured 1,000 and led me through the water, and it was knee deep. Again he measured 1,000 and led me through the water, and it was waist deep. And again he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not pass through, for the water had risen. It was deep enough to swim in, a river that could not be passed through. And he said to me, Son of man, have you seen this? Then he led me back to the bank of the river. As I went back, I saw on the bank of the river very many trees on the one side and on the other. This is wonderful. And he said to me, This water flows toward the eastern region and goes down into the Arabah. The Arabah is a plain on the western shore of the Dead Sea, and enters the sea. This stream enters the sea at the Arabah. And when the water flows into the sea, the water will become fresh. And wherever the river goes, every living creature that swarms will live, and there will be very many fish. For this water goes there, and that the waters of the sea may become fresh, so everything will live where the river goes. Fishermen will stand beside the sea. From En-gedi to En-eglaim, it will be a place for the spreading of nets. Its fish will be of very many kinds, like the fish of the great sea, that is the Mediterranean. But its swamps and marshes will not become fresh. They are to be left for salt. And on the banks, on both sides of the river, there will grow all kinds of trees for food. Their leaves will not wither, nor their fruit fail, but they shall bear fresh fruit every month, because the water for them flows from the sanctuary. Their fruit will be for food, and their leaves for healing. Now, I made a kind of a smart aleck remark here. This seems like a no-brainer, but in order for water to be flowing out from the temple, there has to be a temple for water to flow out from, right? So this is another one of those scriptures that tells us that the temple will be rebuilt. How and when, who knows? So right now the Dead Sea is indeed dead. And by the way, the Israelis don't like you calling it the Dead Sea. They like you to call it the Salt Sea or the Eastern Sea, because they make quite a tidy living from the minerals that they take from the Dead Sea, and from tourists going in there to float in it. You don't swim in it. You can't.
Don't shave before you go in.
You don't shave, and you don't open your eyes in the water. Continuing on in verse 19, Egypt shall become a desolation, and Edom a desolate wilderness, for the violence done to the people of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. But Judah shall be inhabited forever, and Jerusalem to all generations. I will avenge their blood, and that word is nakah. We'll look at that in a minute. Blood I have not avenged, for the Lord dwells in Zion. Throughout God's word, Egypt symbolizes worldliness and sin. And so when he says that he's going to make Egypt a desolation, symbolically he's saying he's going to destroy sin. He's going to destroy the destroyer. Now, historically, of course, Egypt held Israel captive for hundreds of years. But as I said, symbolically, it represents sin and the ravages that sin brings. Now, today, the Valley of the Nile is fertile, but the rest of Egypt is desert, terrible desert, including Sinai, where the Israelites wandered for 40 years. By the way, the southern end of all those tunnels in Gaza is at the Sinai, right? And you guys know that in 67, Israel took the Sinai, all of it, all the way to the brook of Egypt, which is what God promised to Abraham. But then they gave it back as part of the Camp David Accords. They gave Sinai back to Egypt. But Egypt didn't want then and doesn't want now Gaza. Nobody wants Gaza. So it may be that God is going to render the Nile Valley even desolate, even though now it's a fertile area. By the way, the Nile has a problem because when they built the Aswan Dam, it doesn't flood every year like it used to. And so they have to artificially flood the Nile Valley to bring those nutrients down so they can continue to cultivate it. Now, Edom, that he talks about here, is modern-day Jordan, and it's named after Jacob's brother Esau. We'll see this when we look at Genesis, of course. It's the area where Esau's descendants went to live. And I don't know if you're familiar with the story, but Jacob kind of cheated Esau out of Isaac's blessing, their father's blessing, because Esau came out first. They were twins, and Esau was born first. So as the firstborn, Esau was supposed to have a double portion of the inheritance, right? Well, Jacob tricked Isaac into blessing him instead of Esau, and when Esau found out, Esau said he was going to kill him. And so Jacob ran up to the land of where Abraham had come from in Padan Aram, and where Rebekah, his mother, had come from, and hid out there for 20 years. And when he came back, he was afraid Esau still wanted to kill him, and they met and kissed and made up. And then Esau went east toward Jordan to the land that's called Edom now, and Jacob went west to the land of Canaan. Now, later on, when the Israelites were passing through, they asked for permission to go through Edom, and Edom denied them permission. And so God spoke through Balaam, the guy with the talking donkey, that Edom would one day be dispossessed. They would no longer own their land. Joel says here that it'll become a desolate wilderness. Well, I can tell you, Edom and Seir and Moab are a desolate wilderness already. You've never seen such absolute desolation. Now, just before we finish here, this word "naka" that the ESV translates as "avenge." It says, "I'll avenge their blood," and that I haven't avenged before. Right? It can also mean to be clean, or to be free from guilt, or to be innocent. So if you look at the various English language translations, they're roughly 50-50. Some of them translate it as avenge, and some of them translate it as make clean or forgive. So the ESV translates it as avenge, so that would seem to indicate that God is going to avenge the blood of Judah on Judah's neighbors, like, for example, Egypt and Edom that we just looked at, because they've shed Judah's innocent blood. But you can also think of it as it seems to indicate that God will forgive Judah of the blood of innocent people that they have shed. So in the New Living Translation, for example, of this verse, it says, "I will pardon my people's crimes, which I have not yet pardoned, and I, the Lord, will make my home in Jerusalem with my people." So, once again, solution to this problem is left as an exercise for the student. Right? Could mean one or the other. So, just in conclusion, as we have seen over and over again, the lack of any historical context or geographical context for Joel makes it very difficult to interpret it. We've seen that some of it, like with all prophecy, some of it should be taken literally and some of it should be taken as symbolic. And we have seen that some of it could be taken as having already been fulfilled and some of it as to be fulfilled in the future. I think, and once again, this is just my humble opinion, I think that most of it is yet to be in the future. But if you remember, Dorian was talking about in their church, which is the Church of Christ, they teach that all of these things have been already been fulfilled. So I think there's strong biblical evidence that not all of it has been fulfilled at the very least. But here again, we don't know the future. If we knew the future, we'd all be rich, right? Which would mean none of us would be rich because we'd all be rich.
It's interesting to me that the biblical standard for knowing if a prophet is a true prophet or not is his prophecy.
Whether it's
true. And if those prophecies are thousands and thousands and thousands of years future, then
How can you
speaking
tell?
is not very helpful.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about it is that there are several places, like Daniel, for example. It says, "Lock up the prophecy, for it's for the end of days."
Yeah.
But then John is told in Revelation, "No, shout this from the rooftops. This is coming soon." So, if you watch The Chosen, there's kind of a running joke where they talk about somebody will come to Jesus and say, "Well, you said that soon this would happen," and Jesus will say, "Well, soon, there's that word again. It's kind of a tricky word." But, it's, I don't know. It's in a way it'll be a lot easier with Genesis because Genesis is a history book and there's no
This is what happened and that's what happened. Now you can see it.
of course, with Genesis, you got to start from the very beginning. And either this story about Adam and Eve and the serpent is true, pretty much as we write it, or as we read it, not symbolic, but literally true. Otherwise, the cross of Christ would have been unnecessary and ineffective. So, and I was talking to Randy about this last week. I believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And because I believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ, that makes me have to believe in Genesis 3. Otherwise, the gospel is, there is no such thing as original sin, and therefore no need for a sacrifice to clean it up.
Interesting, as you're talking about Joel, and you're getting ready to be teaching on Genesis, you see the key to what we're talking about here is in Genesis. Okay, that they say the key to Revelation is Genesis.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at that early history, yeah.
We when I was a young pup, and I'll say this in our first Genesis lesson, I didn't know anything about the Bible really. And I asked one of the guys in my men's group, I said, "Well, how should I read my Bible?" He said, "Read the Gospel of John. Then start at the beginning and read it." It's very good advice. Yeah. Read the Gospel of John so you know what the target is. Right? Because the Gospel of John is all about the deity of Christ. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Word became flesh and dwelt among us, right? John's Gospel is all about the deity of Christ. And in reality, all the Bible is about the deity of Christ.
Yeah, I've been going through the Bible Project videos and everything's for my devotion with my Bible reading. But their whole thing is how it's all one story about Christ. And it has really been, it has been very, to go through the whole thing that way has been really interesting.
Martin Luther said it 500 years ago. Die ganze Schrift treibt Christum. All of the scripture pertains to Christ. So, I mean, and who was it that was it Brian Instrument? He's talking about when we read, we have to look for Jesus when we're reading. Sir.
I understand that this is the last meeting this year.
Yes.
Okay. When are we going to meet again?
January the 8th.
On January the 8th?
I think it's January the 8th.
That's on Monday.
Right.
That's Easter man. Okay. Okay.
So, and on January 8th, we won't start Genesis that day. We'll watch Dave Rolfe.
Okay.
I think you'll like Dave, but you have to promise me you won't say Cowabunga or Tubular. Because he does sound like a Ninja Turtle, he really does. He looks a little bit like a Ninja Turtle.
We had some,
Wait a minute, is this on?
we had some people we knew when we were in New Hampshire, they had gone to New Tribe Mission. And,
When will the new lesson be available?
Well, we're not going to start Genesis until the 15th of January. So, long time. And I'll send you all the link to the video that we're going to watch. But I won't be doing a lesson for our last look at Joel or a last look at eschatology for a while. The lesson that I want to watch of Dave's is about eschatology. He did a series, I think it's a 13-part series called Basic Theology on his Wednesday nights, or it might have been Sunday nights. But it's like 13 one-hour lessons, basically. And the nice thing about him is, first of all, Dave is very casual in his teaching, I guess, very balanced. His ministry is called the Balanced Word. He doesn't take a hard over position, except, I mean, what was one of the things that he said was talking about, I wouldn't allow a woman pastor in my church, and I wouldn't go to a church that had a woman pastor. So he does have positions that he takes. He's not, I mean, our pastor in California thought it was too liberal. But our pastor in California was rabidly conservative, or is rabidly conservative. But anyway, I think you'll like him because he takes all of those eschatological positions, including preterism. Preterism is the belief that all this stuff has already taken place. And he says, there's biblical basis for all of these, and this is nothing that we should divide on. Right? That starts that out right away. But anyway, one of those 13 lessons was dedicated to eschatology, and he just covers the different traditions, if you will, about eschatology.
Different understandings.
Mm-hmm.
Now these that I got out of the cabinet, when they talk about dates, and they talk about milk and honey, those are the medjool date that they raise. And it's like candy. Very sweet.
Do you know where else they raised medjool dates?
California.
The Salton Sea. It's a coincidence? The geography there is almost identical to the Dead Sea. And they've just discovered the world's largest supply of lithium underneath the Salton Sea. When we went to Jordan, you know, the Dead Sea is 1,300 feet below sea level, right? The Red Sea is at sea level, right? The problem is the Dead Sea is drying up. And in order to produce the cosmetics and the fertilizers and all the things that they produce from the Dead Sea Basin, they need both the water and the earth. They don't, if it dries up completely, the products will not be available. And if it gets not salty, products will not be available, right? So they have a vested interest, both Israel and Jordan, in keeping the Dead Sea as it is. It's interesting because historically, the Dead Sea has tracked population inversely. The higher the population of the area, the lower the Dead Sea. Going back thousands of years, it's been that way. Anyway, we're driving down to Petra from you cross over into Jordan at Jericho, or go over the Jordan River, and then you drive south toward the Red Sea. And our tour guide was talking about they're talking about building a canal from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea. Well, as you drive down from Jerusalem,
Down.
you pass the sea level camel about halfway down. There's a sea level camel. You can ride the sea level camel if you have a few shekels on your hands. But the Bedouin that owns this camel comes every morning and stands there at sea level, right? Well, it's a long way still down to down to the Dead Sea, and the Sea of Galilee is 600 feet below sea level. We're talking about building a canal from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea to keep the water in it. Anybody know the history of the Salton Sea? Sir.
When you decide what lesson you're gonna cover on the next meeting, I would appreciate it if you would email me, this.
Sure.
So I can get it. Now, I'll be out of town from New Year's Eve until January 4th.
Okay.
So any time the 4th on.
I won't even have it till the 15th of January.
Okay,
So, well, a few days before that.
thanks.
But anyway, the Salton Sea, the way the Salton Sea was formed, they had taken all of these, the Colorado River, they dug all these canals from the Colorado River out into Central California. That whole area is below sea level. Okay? There's a water tower in El Centro, California that has a line on it, sea level. Okay? And so what happened was in the 20s, I think, 1922, it rained and rained and rained and rained. And the Colorado overflowed these canals. And at one point, there was a waterfall that was about 100 feet tall, and it was walking the desert back tens of feet every day, just eroding it away. All that water went into the Salton Sea Basin and formed the Salton Sea. And so I was telling the tour guide this, are you familiar with the history of the Salton Sea? What happens when men can't control their canals? Oh, we'll be able to handle it now. Remember that Sea of Galilee, that's your fresh water source right there.
Makes me think of Park, the guy that's
Yeah.
talking about chaos theory.
Yeah. Jeff Goldblum, your
Yeah.
people were so busy trying to figure out if they could do this, they never stopped to ask whether they should. There are people, as we speak, trying to create black hole material. What do you do with a black hole once you got it? Yeah.
Get some.
Where do you keep it? Stick it in the shoebox in the closet? They were talking about there's some new drug that they're talking about for morning sickness. But you ever heard of thalidomide? That's what that was supposed to help with. If you remember thalidomide. In the 50s, they had this drug called thalidomide they were giving pregnant women because it relieved morning sickness.
Oh, I think I remember.
And it caused.
And then it also caused people to be born with kind of half arms, half limbs, legs,
Terrible.
little like
Stumps
little like
with toes.
the bottom joint would be that long. This leg there, this bone, little claw-like things on the end. But horrible deformities, and I guess painful. But
Yeah, you don't see it too much in the States because it was never
approved.
approved for general use, so it didn't get not too many
It's a
women.
lot of Europe.
Yeah, I mean, when we were there in the 80s, they were just everywhere.
It's good for people trying by that in their prime by that time. And it didn't affect mental capabilities or anything like that, just affected the development of the limbs.
It's good.
Yeah, if I won the lottery, which
Kind of hard to do when you
kind
don't play.
of like it's hard for water to flow out of the temple unless there's a temple.
Mhm.
to-
Or we'd allow it.
in order to win the lottery, you have to play the lottery.
Right.
But so that's not going to happen. But if I did win the lottery, I'd buy you all tickets to Israel, even in the midst of all this horrible stuff, because it's
So
just
let's get rid of it.
well, that day that we couldn't go up on the Temple Mount because of the microphone. Nola looked at me. She knew I'd been in Israel before. She said, "Do you know where the Pool of Bethesda is?"
Mhm.
And I said, "Yes, I do." I didn't, but I said I did. Jerusalem isn't that big. The old city isn't that big. But so I wandered around until I found the Pool of Bethesda. But it was a wonderful blessing. I was carrying the microphone that they wouldn't let up on the Temple Mount. So I got there, and it was a blessing that I couldn't go on the Temple Mount that day, because whenever I go to Israel, I get very, very depressed. And the closer I get to Jerusalem, the more depressed I get. Because everywhere you go, there are people trying to build a stairway to heaven.
Mhm.
Right? They're burning their incense.
Mhm.
They're reading their prayers and doing their ablutions. They're doing all these ceremonies trying to get to salvation. And they're missing the book. Lots and lots of them. Different, Muslims, Eastern Orthodox, Orthodox Jews, just everywhere. It's very depressing because the truth is in front of them. So I was, ranting at God about this. And I got to the Pool of Bethesda, and I went down to the bottom of the Pool of Bethesda. The Pool of Bethesda is very interesting because prior to 1967, biblical skeptics said it didn't exist because it's very well described in the Bible, and that's where the guy stood by the water, and nobody would put him in. Or he lay by the water, nobody would put him in the water, and he thought Jesus came and told him, "No, it's not about the water; it's about your faith." Right? You want to be healed?
Then be healed.
Well, yes. Well, then take up your bed and walk. Of course, Jesus did that on the Sabbath,
Mhm.
But but anyway, that happened at the Pool of Bethesda, and biblical skeptics said that no, this didn't happen because it's described very well, and there was no such place. Well, in '67, the Jordanians blew up the old, the Jewish quarter, And, you know,
Behold,
the Jews came in afterwards and started digging up the rubble, and voila, there's the pool of Bethesda.
seems like recently they uncovered like more of the steps or something. It
Uh,
was something
the,
not too long ago.
the, those were the steps by the, pool of Siloam.
So
That's where, Jesus, he spit this in the temple court. He took this blind guy, spit in the sand, made some mud, put it on his eyes, said, "Go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. You'll be healed." Anyway, yeah, they just unearthed a bunch more steps by the pool of Siloam. She was gonna do it. She's gonna do it.
She did.
But anyway, so I was all depressed. I'm in the pool of Bethesda, and I hear this singing. And I recognized the melody, but I didn't recognize the words. And so a lot of steps down there. You climb back out the steps, and there's like 75 or 80 of my Korean brothers and sisters singing a worship song to the real God. And so it's, sorry, Lord, I forgot. You got this.
my son went on a mission trip when he was in high school to Hungary, and the group that he was with would go around and do street drama,
Mm-hmm.
and then gather a crowd and then share the gospel with them. He told about one day they went out, they prayed before they left, for the God to open those doors for them. And they went to one where they were planning to go that day, and the police there wouldn't let them do anything. They could leave. And they go to another place, and same thing happened. Finally, they ended up in this park or something where they weren't intending to go, and there was this band or a group there that was real popular and funny. They were shooting a video of this band, and they ended up shooting the video of them doing their street drama, which was a proclamation of the gospel, which would be nationally televised. One of the leaders said, how sometimes you have a surprise party for some birthday party for somebody, and you take them and you run them around all over town while everybody's gathering for a surprise. It's all planned, laid out, and you bring them up and they're surprised. Sometimes God does that.
Yeah.
So they had gone to all of these places and been turned out, it seemed like a really disappointing day, and they got to share their drama with the entire country.
That's in Proverbs, isn't it? Your man makes his plans, but God directs his paths.
Open your gift.
Well, I was gonna save it for Christmas.
I like to see people open gifts.
Okay, oh. Sakes.
You can put it back in and open it.
She's gonna have to if she wants more than one present. You ever seen On Golden Pond? Henry Fonda, he's losing his memory. Dabney Coleman says, "Oh, you're reading." Wow,
Wow.
that one of yours?
It's gorgeous.
I didn't know you did Turning too.
You've got a lot of tea in there. Loose tea.
That's a potpourri pot.
Neat. Smell my
The
tea.
top of it's got a potpourri.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
It's beautiful. I would put that back in the bag.
What's that made of?
It's made out of Georgia red clay in Lizella, Georgia. It's horsehair pottery.
You ever look on YouTube at a guy, Phil Anderson, Shady Acres Wood Shop.
Nope.
He is pretty cool. And people send him stuff on purpose. And he'll tackle just about anything.
Pieces of wood that you couldn't possibly turn to make into
Yeah,
anything.
And he makes beautiful things.
yeah.
Not practical.
He never uses epoxy.
No, no resin, no
This
epoxy.
is super glue to fix
Dangerous.
flaws.
I mean, just mind blowing some of the stuff he does. He really likes wood that's a little bit punky,
Mm-hmm.
because you can get some really interesting figuring out of it.
Spalting out of it,
Mm-hmm.
black lines and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really messy to try to turn because of the loopness.
Yeah.
So he's very, very religious about dust control, particularly getting dust in his.
Oh, he's had,
first.
they thought he had lung cancer.
It's easy to become allergic to cedar and walnut and
Mm.
some other things.
Mm-hmm.
I need to be more careful of this myself, but I have gotten to where I wear a dust mask.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've got a dust collector that
Mm-hmm.
when I'm turning in that, it put away from me.
Yeah, that's what he's got. You should have a look. He makes gorgeous stuff.
I just started making the potpourri lids for
Mhm.
pots.
That is gorgeous. Thank you.
Oh, well, no wonder it's not working. I'm hitting the wrong button. It's two mouse buttons here. I thought I was hitting the left one.
I just thought about that because he does a lot of stuff like this, because you sure as heck aren't not gonna turn that into a bowl that you can use in the kitchen.
Yeah.
It's got, holes through it, so they'll make them into stuff like
And
this.
I turned
Change dishes and
had
things.
somebody give me a whole pickup load of mountain laurel root ball. I turned a bowl out of one of those. Some of the holes I filled with black epoxy. It turned out pretty nice. It's not this big. Just big root ball. But it sold it up at Highland, so I gotta make some more of it. Boy, that's like turning stone.
Mm-hmm.
And you're hitting rocks too, because inside roots.
So I didn't hit any, so fortunate, but it was hard. I had to do a lot of sharpening while I was there.
Y'all see what I did to brought the tractor back. Couldn't haul it back up the hill. Dug all that gravel up. We it was up. The fence was kind of like here, and the trailer's cockeyed, and just about up against the fence. So I put a chalk on the right-hand wheel of the trailer, and another chalk behind, well behind, like several feet behind the left wheel of the trailer. And the guy that was here to do the concrete estimate helped me get the hitch off the ball of the Hyundai, and then got the Hyundai out of the way, and then we just kind of pushed on the tongue of the trailer until it
With a landscape.
rotated around. Fell back against both the chalks. Tomorrow probably. Well, tomorrow we got to go to Greenville, but get the tractor off the trailer, and hopefully the Hyundai will pull the
Trailer out of it.
empty trailer out of there without digging a pit to China.
Well, it's a long story, but when we finally got our key from the sellers, it had been raining for a week. And of course, that part of the house wasn't there. And they had, the sellers had, this in here was all trees.
Isn't she soft?
And
So soft.
so the Meads had cut them down
No,
to
she's
make
got
a turnaround out here. and used the trunks to hold the gravel for the turnaround. And I came in here with that little camper and the big old van, and I pulled in and I backed it over there, and I managed to drop the wheels of the camper over that lip,
Oh,
and there was no getting it out of there. And it was so wet and soft, it was all grass. So I'm slipping down this hill, heading for the lake. Feel great. My camper's gonna go for a swim, but I got stuck on the old dock and hit the dock and stopped. We didn't have any telecommunications, so I had to walk up the road till I finally got a signal. And it was raining, and I looked up towing companies and come up with Tow. And can you come in? And so he came. $150 later, he'd hauled both pieces up out of there.
That was kind of.
But when he pulled in, as soon as I realized what he was doing, I'm like, no, aw, me, because he did. Because you go back a ways and then it tips down hard, and getting back up over that lip with any sort of really heavy load, like a honking big tractor, ain't happening. Ain't happening. Not even with that big old van.
You could use the Ford truck, but you see with the Ford truck, what we done last time, done goes.
Yeah.
Well, that was the dump
Well, it's
truck.
because this was filled with gravel that instead of using the rock that they should have used, they used leftover gravel from. Well, if you go downstairs, there's that pad down there.
washed
Well,
gravel
the-
instead of
The pad is poured on top of gravel that's underneath of it that's being enclosed by a concrete block wall, right? So they built the concrete block wall, backfilled it with gravel, put wooden forms on top of it, or on the blocks, right, up high enough to make the pad, and poured the pad, including filling the voids in the concrete block, right? So, but it's sitting on gravel. Well, they had all this gravel left over, so instead of getting other rock to backfill behind the house here, they just push that gravel in there, and it's just useless. It's completely
that's that washed gravel.
yeah.
Crusher runs what you want to use because it's got all the
Exactly.
fine stuff. Man,
So you like those med jewels? Those dates?
mm-hmm.
Those are good, aren't they?
They are like candy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The first time we went, our tour guide was of the opinion that in the scriptures, when it speaks of honey, is they don't really have much in the way of honeybees. They have some, but not enough for the land to be flowing.
They have bees build their nests in lions' carcasses.
Yes. Anyways, he said because they make honey out of the dates. It's
Where's everybody going? Where's everybody going, huh? Where's everybody going? Can I get out?
date honey. And it's this really thick stuff that they make out of crunched up filtered dates.
We first time we went over there, the tour guide told us about the Ottomans had a rule, a law that essentially they owned all the date palms,
The med jewels.
and there was a Jewish kid in the early Zionist movement, late 1800s,
Good luck with that.
who had been raised by Bedouins, spoke perfect Arabic. He dressed up like a Bedouin, went into Jordan, smuggled like 100 date palms out of there. and broke the Ottoman monopoly on dates. Yeah,
They found some date seeds at
Masada.
Masada. And because they weren't real absolutely 100% that the medjool was the date of ancient times. So they went ahead and planted them and they germinated, but apparently they're all male. You have male trees and female trees. So they got lots of male pollen.
But nothing to make dates out of. Or nothing to fertilize to make dates.
Well, they have the medjools and they will fertilize, so
Well, but from those, I mean.
yeah. So if they just keep raising trees from the hybrids, they'll eventually get back to what they were, but I think good dates.